Greetings, my friends. Thank you for watching this video, and if you would be so kind, please subscribe if you like what you see. Help our channel to keep growing and keep fighting the war to save pop culture. Together, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy. Enjoy, and thanks. Greetings, my friends. I am Dictor Van Doomcock, the future ruler of Earth, and today I bring you a tale of outrage, exploitation, greed, and possible revenge. For decades, Marvel Comics was built on the backs of creative geniuses whose creations raked in billions of dollars while they were paid almost nothing in comparison for all rights to their dreams. But now a series of lawsuits against Marvel are poised to bring Marvel to their knees and extract millions, perhaps billions, from their corporate coffers. And at a time when viewers are abandoning Marvel and the days of the billion-dollar blockbuster appear to be gone forever, these lawsuits could be the tipping point that breaks the corporate camel's back. The American comic book industry was built on broken hearts and broken dreams. The towering legends of the field, guys like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Don Heck, Gene Colan, Stan Lee, all of these guys were crushed under a system that extracted their creativity, used their creations to build a literal entertainment empire, and then paid them a few $100 here and there. This happened at DC with Superman, where two young lads named Siegel and Schuster created Superman, and then, because they needed the work, they sold Superman lock, stock, and barrel to DC Comics for $130. All rights to perhaps the most lucrative superhero of all time, the first big superhero to ever appear, sold for $130. Sure, Siegel and Schuster made a pretty good living for a while, doing work for hire for DC, until they dared to ask for a little more of the vast fortune their hard work was bringing into DC, at which point they were fired. That $130 check haunted them, and in a supreme irony that illustrates just how unjust this affair was, recently the canceled check paid to Siegel and Schuster sold at auction for $160,000. There's a story that's been around for decades that later on in the 70s, when they made a Broadway musical about Superman called It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, one of the creators of Superman was working in the theater as an usher. That's how desperate he was for money. He had to work as an usher in the Broadway theater, starring his childhood creation. Whether or not that story is apocryphal or literal, it's a perfect metaphor for the American comic book industry in a nutshell, and there are many stories like it, of creative geniuses being exploited, ripped off, and cast aside by mega corporations growing fat on their dreams. But now, thanks to a series of lawsuits brought against Marvel by the heirs of the people who truly built the Marvel empire brick by brick, Marvel may have to move out of their shiny palace and go on metaphorical food stamps. The Hollywood Reporter recently released an article about these lawsuits titled, "Marvel's Suing to Keep Rights to Avengers Characters from Copyright Termination." Essentially, the time when Marvel could fatten itself sucking the life's blood from the families of creators of these classic characters is drawing to an end. According to the Hollywood Reporter, quote, "Disney's Marvel unit is suing to hold on to full control of Avengers characters including Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Falcon, Thor, and others. The complaints, which the Hollywood Reporter has obtained, come against the heirs of some late comic book geniuses including Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and Gene Colan. The suits seek declaratory relief that these blockbuster characters are ineligible for copyright termination as works made for hire. If Marvel loses, Disney would have to share ownership of characters worth billions. In August, the administrator of Ditko's estate filed a notice of termination on Spider-Man, which first appeared in comic book form in 1962. Under the termination provisions of copyright law, authors or their heirs can reclaim rights once granted to publishers after waiting a statutory set period of time. According to the termination notice, Marvel would have to give up Ditko's rights to its iconic character in June of 2023.
Holy hole in a wallet, Batcock! Can you imagine Marvel having to give up their ownership of Spider-Man? Of Doctor Strange? Or even have to share ownership if the case went that way? Man. And they thought the MCU was fucked with Feige's brilliant idea to turn the MCU into the MCU.
Yeah. Turns out that Feige is the Danish word for fucked, Harvey. After all his initial success, which I'm personally convinced was more Favreau than Feige, Kevin Feige evidently started a regime of estrogen replacement and woke pills, the result being Marvel movies losing money for the first time ever, and a bleak forecast moving forward, with the Eternals in particular looking to bomb on a Dresden-like scale. But an even greater threat to Marvel than Feige is the revenge of Steve Ditko, Stan Lee, and Gene Colan, among others, who want their just piece of the pie. The article continues. Marvel is facing other termination notices. For example, Larry Lieber, who worked at Marvel as a writer too, filed termination notices over creations in May. The heirs of the comic book creators, including Black Widow creator Don Rico, are being represented by Mark Toberoff, who once famously represented Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster in an unsuccessful termination attempt against DC. DC saved off termination by counterclaiming against Toberoff and asserting tortious interference of its rights. The publisher was represented by Dan Petrocelli at O'Melveny, who just so happens to be representing Disney now in its efforts to keep rights to various Avenger characters. Petrocelli is filing several lawsuits in New York and California against Lieber, Don Heck, Patrick Ditko, Don Rico, and Keith Detweiler. The cases will focus on the creation of famous comic book characters and who should be deemed the statutory author. The litigation figures to focus on the Marvel method, a loose collaborative working atmosphere where initial ideas were briefly discussed with artists responsible for taking care of the details. The Marvel method has been the subject of prior litigation, such as a dispute a decade back over Ghost Rider. And it will again. For example, one of the complaints filed here today asserts Marvel had the right to exercise creative control over Lieber's contributions and paid Lieber a per-page rate for his work.
So, yeah, right, the Marvel method, where basically they would go ahead and talk out the plots, and the guys who were not really paid to do that, they were artists, would be contributing story stuff, and so that would not be covered under work for hire.
Correctamundo, Harvey. Correctamundo. You have, in your borderline legal way, grasped the nuances of the case.
So what could happen to Marvel if they lose these cases? I mean, is it the end of the Mouse's empire?
Well, not the Mouse's empire, but perhaps the Marvel wing may have some really tough road ahead. It depends on how bad things are behind the scenes at Disney and Marvel, Harvey. Do I think they'll go out of business? That's extremely unlikely since they're owned by Disney and Disney is still making good money from ESPN and ABC. But given the drop-off in Marvel's success since the appropriately named Endgame, any drop-off in revenue could impact the company hard. Whether it would be a staggering blow or a crippling blow remains to be seen. The article concludes, if the plaintiffs win, Disney expects to at least hold on to at least a share of character rights as co-owners. Ouch. The studio would have to share profits with the others. Additionally, the termination provisions of copyright law only apply in the United States, allowing Disney to continue to control and profit from foreign exploitation.
The key word being exploitation.
Indeed, Harvey. Indeed. The American comic book industry has fattened on the backs of creators long enough. It's time for a change, my friends. Let's hope that these lawsuits prevail and these people, these families who were deprived of their just share of profits will go ahead and have justice at last. A fitting end to to the superhero story. From the center of the earth, this is Dichter Van Doomcock bidding you all, my friends, stay angry. Ha 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 ha